Good morning, church. It is Wednesday, and it is the third day of Revival Week, as I call it. And it turns out that I'm not the only one thinking this, feeling this, hoping for this chance at awakening or arrival. In my brief study, there's many different websites that began around February or April calling for the same thing. And I don't think that people call for revival just because it's a cool thing or like it's the thing to do. I really sense in my spirit, and hopefully in yours, that God is doing something powerful. God is behind the scenes of something extraordinary. And I'm not talking at all about the COVID-19, that God is behind it, but I do believe that God takes tragedy such as this and finds triumph in it and uses us as instruments of that triumph. And so I'd like to be a part of that, and I'd like to commit myself to prayer. And as I study the Great Awakening, it was only halted for about 3 decades for the American Revolutionary War, but it picked quickly back up shortly after that. And would you believe it? It began with prayer. The environment of the post-American War was moral decline, economic prosperity, political gains locally and internationally, and there was definitely still a need for prayer. And so somebody named John Erskine republished a prayer by Jonathan Edwards, and I'd like to read the name of that prayer for you because I can memorize it. It is a humble attempt to promote explicit agreement and visible union of God's people in extraordinary prayer for the revival of religion and the advancement of Christ's kingdom. That is quite a mouthful. And so the Second Great Awakening committed to Saturday evening prayer, Sunday morning prayer, and the first Tuesday of every quarter. And that sounds pretty doable, but they committed themselves for 7 years. And I don't know about you, but it's hard for me to commit to anything for 7 days, let alone 7 years. So I'm not saying that that's maybe for us today, but I do want to invite you to commit yourself to prayer for a specific revival in your community, in your family, in our churches, in our nation. And I'd invite you again to join us for prayer this Wednesday or this evening via Zoom. I'm going to be sending invitations out, and just bring your prayer requests, bring your ideas of how God is moving among us. And I would like to leave you with a passage from the prophet Zechariah. This was the passage that Jonathan Edwards began his prayer with. And his prayer is quite lengthy, so I'm not going to read his prayer, but I will read Zechariah chapter 8, verses 20 through 23. Thus says the Lord of hosts, people shall yet come, the inhabitants of many cities. The inhabitants of one city shall go to another, saying, come, let us go to entreat the favor of the Lord and to seek the Lord of hosts. I myself am going. Many peoples and strong nations shall come to seek the Lord of hosts in Jerusalem and to entreat the favor of the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, in those days 10 men from nations of every language shall take hold of a Jew, grasping his garment and saying, let us go with you, for we have heard that God is with you. Now this passage talks about how one person invites another to prayer. Now it says specifically Jerusalem, and the Jewish people at that time, they were the people of God exclusively. They had the commandments. They worshiped the true God. And we know that Christ has come and opened up that covenant to anybody who calls upon him and believes in him. And so, friends, I invite you as a person of God, as a child of God, as a follower of Christ, to invite somebody to pray with you at that moment, with you this evening. Perhaps we could get something consistent, like the first Tuesday of every quarter for 7 years. I don't know, but it begins with you. Revival begins with you and me and let us be encouraged and diligent in prayer. Blessings, friends.